Welcome, and thank you all for joining us for this episode of the Crexi Podcast, an insider's look at all things commercial real estate. In this show, we cover a broad range of topics that cater to CRE newcomers and industry leaders alike. I'm your host, Shanti Ryle, Director of Content Marketing here at Crexi, and today we are so excited to sit down with Genessy Jaramillo of BKREA. Before we dive in, a little bit about our guest. Genessy Jaramillo focuses on land sales in Manhattan in her role at BKREA, working side by side with the company's chairman and CEO, Bob Knackel. You might have heard of him. Previously, Genessy specialized in retail investment sales and leasing at Crossmark Services, representing clients across the Southeast in acquisitions, dispositions, and tenant-landlord representation. She began her career at Marcus & Millichap in Nashville, gaining expertise in office and industrial asset classes. Fluent in English and Spanish, she holds real estate licenses in Florida, Tennessee, and New York. With a business management degree from the University of Central Florida and active involvement in ULI, ICSC, and NIOP, Genessy applies a service-oriented and market-savvy approach to assisting clients throughout Manhattan. Genessy, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Shanti. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're so happy you're here live in Los Angeles, coming to visit us. I know we were just out in your neck of the woods in New York doing some filming a couple months ago, but very special to have you here with us.
Excited to be here.
Yeah. So I know we just covered your very varied background. You've been all over the place, from Nashville to Florida to Manhattan, very different beasts. But I'd love to hear, in your own words, how did you first get started in commercial real estate, and what's the through line of your journey so far?
Yeah, so I guess let's start back in college. That's kind of where I learned the most about the industry in general. I think that, my parents were involved in real estate, but more on the residential side. And it was just kind of like flipping a couple houses here and there. And so it wasn't like I was fully entrenched in real estate or even commercial real estate. So I met the right people in college. I went to get a business degree. I was like, I want to do something in business, but I have no idea what I want to do. And then once I figured out what commercial real estate was and how many different areas of the business I could get into, I was like, oh, I'm 100% doing this. So when I graduated from UCF, I moved to Nashville, and I couldn't get hired anywhere for some reason. It was impossible to find a job as a broker. I didn't have really any experience. So I think that just didn't look so great to these brokerages. And I didn't have anyone in my family that had taught me the way before. So I started at Marcus. They were the only brokerage that would take me at the beginning. I joined the office and industrial team. And that really set the foundation for me in the business. That taught me everything that I needed to know. And I realized that, I loved investment sales, and I didn't really know much about the leasing side because at Marcus, they don't do any leasing. So when I moved to Florida and I joined Crossmark, I did a lot of leasing on the retail side. So I switched markets and switched asset classes, and then did the same thing when I moved to New York. But, for me, New York has been kind of the highlight of my career so far. So I won't be switching again.
Yeah. You're I'm settling in Manhattan for a little while, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, different markets are different enough from one another, but you also are working across different asset classes, especially from the sales and leasing side of things. Huge differences across those. And then finally, when you met Bob, which I do want to hear that story too, and he convinced you, no, you need to be doing land up in New York. Totally different ballgame. What was the mindset shift there when you decided, yes, I'm going to do something completely different in a completely new market?
For me, I think I always wanted to live in New York. I thought that it's just the land of opportunity. What people say, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. I truly do believe that. And I just wanted to challenge myself. I loved what I was doing down in Florida and doing retail. And I worked for a great brokerage. There was no complaints really, not that I needed to go. It was just that I felt it was such an insane opportunity that I couldn't pass up, that I was just I'm doing it no matter what asset class I pick. But I knew that Bob had his reputation in selling development sites, aka land. So I was like, I would love to learn that. I just really was always intrigued by like the development side of the business. And so I was just like, I want to see what land means in New York. Like, because a lot of people think that there isn't a lot of land left. And so I was like, how do they build these new buildings? Why are some buildings taller and some buildings are smaller? And so I was just like, I would love to learn how that comes about, because it wasn't really what I was doing before. And like you said, I came from so many different asset classes, and I just love learning about it because they're all so different.
Absolutely. So how did you meet Bob? How did that happen?
So initially, I actually met Bob on social media. As a young broker, when Bob started on social media and he started putting out all of his amazing content, I was like, obviously, I have to follow this guy. And so again, my like obsession with New York and him being the top like New York City real estate broker, I was like, definitely going to follow him and his story. Like, I thought he was so cool. And so I reached out to him and I was just like, hey, Bob, like, pleasure connecting with you, like people usually do on LinkedIn. And he responded and was like, hey, you too, Genessy. And I can't really remember how like we started getting into like more conversation, but I think he just like asked me what I did down in Florida. And we had like casual conversation. Then we ended up talking about hockey. And then so we were like, yeah, just kind of bonding about sports. And he's a huge hockey fan, if you know anything about Bob.
Oh, yes, he is.
And I'm a big sports fan as well. So we got into the whole thing. He told me his daughter loves hockey. And so like we just started talking about things that were not real estate related. And so we just became friends. And then at like conferences and things like that, I would see him. And then eventually he nominated me for Commercial Real Estate Rising Star for Florida for the Red Awards. So then that happened. And then, like I said, we were just friends for like a while. And then whenever he left JLL is kind of how that happened. And I
said,
joined
hey, we
BKREA.
have this connection. I think you would make sense on my team.
Pretty much. Yeah.
What do you think he saw in you that made him, friendship is awesome, but like, I want you on my team, like my sports team. What do you think he was inspired by in you?
I think he thought that if I was crazy enough to pick up and like move to New York, that like he probably wanted someone like that on his team. You know what I mean? I don't think he knew too much, but he had seen that I'd closed some deals in Florida. I was getting like really great activity. I had the reps, like I had the knowledge, and he was just like, everything else I can just teach you. You know what I mean? It's not rocket science. It's just going to take a while. You're switching markets, and it's not like I'm just going to some like not so crazy market. Like I was going to New York City. So he was just like, but don't worry about it. Like if you're willing to risk everything and leave like somewhere where you're finally like getting some traction to come start over again in New York, that's the kind of person that I would want on my team. So
the test was the offer.
Yeah, I think so.
In a fun way.
I think so.
Totally. So, land anywhere is very distinct from all other asset classes. So, and like you said, it's New York City, the probably most complicated, most going on, most action happening, highest stakes market. How did you go about learning? How do you keep your education up, especially when the industry is changing so fast? And again, New York's its own beast compared to a national scale.
You just have to like dive right in. You know what I mean? Like try not to waste any time, but also be patient with yourself because it's a lot of information at once. Like I always tell people, like still to this day, and I've been there for maybe 8 months now, I feel like I'm not just drinking from a fire hose, but maybe like 8 fire hoses, like all day, every day. So it's a lot of information. And you always have like the basics of the industry that you like hold with you. So it's not like super, super intimidating, but it's still intimidating. These people are like from New York. They know what they're talking about. They know the market very well. I've been to New York a lot, but I never thought like, oh, let me learn like the ins and outs for like real estate purposes. So it was just a lot of like diving into really learning the market, understanding who the key players are, and like just listening to Bob too, you know what I mean? Showing up to work, being in the office, and just diving in like all day, every day. You have to just like eat, breathe, sleep New York City real estate, and like learning everything about zoning and policy. And, Bob's the ultimate mentor. So, I have the best possible situation, but it's a lot. And you just have to be patient with yourself because it takes time.
Absolutely. Do you have any things, in the learning process, learning the market or learning under Bob that were surprising to you, maybe from a market perspective, maybe just about like this particular people in New York market perspective? Is there anything that's kind of made you go, oh, I didn't think that would be the case here, but it is?
Um, Not really. I mean, I guess people have this misconception that people in New York are very like cutthroat or they're sharks and it's just like very
Mm.
intense. And it is those things. And you do run into those kinds of people, like, but you have that really in any market. So
Hmm.
I think that I was more pleasantly surprised that people are actually very kind, and things just move fast. Like they just don't have time to waste. You know what I mean? So people are like, let's go, go, go.
Yeah.
But it's not that they're like, these rude New Yorkers that people think they have that like misconception.
Yeah.
Like people are patient and they're like willing to work with you. So I think that was kind of a surprise. Yeah.
Yeah. Something I really love about New York is just the honesty. Like people will be straight up with you. Like you said,
Yeah.
there's no time to waste, and sometimes it can come off a little blunt, but
Right.
always down to talk with you, tell you the truth.
Right.
It's a huge market, so there's a lot of collaboration that has to go into it. So totally makes sense that
Yeah.
you found
Yeah.
that openness there. I'm curious, in these first few months working with Bob, is there any key feedback he's given you that you've really taken to heart as you tackle this new market and new asset class?
Yeah, I think that, Bob's always on the phone. And that's what I think that younger brokers, including myself, like need to learn more. Like, even if you think you're making a lot of calls, you need to make more calls. So it's like I said at the
Yeah.
beginning, you kind of have to be patient with yourself because you have to balance. Like, I don't like making calls without knowing anything. You know what I mean? Just like day
Mm.
one, I don't know anything about the market. Someone's going to be like, oh, that property right here down the street. And I'm like, no, like I have no idea. You know what I mean? So I want to be semi-educated on like what I'm talking about before I
Mhm.
just start making a million cold calls a day. So it was like finding that balance, and like that was like some constructive feedback that, Bob was saying is just like you need to be on the phone more, you need to be like calling people, you need to be building
Mhm.
those relationships. I was doing a lot of like events and like learning the market and stuff like
Mhm.
that. That's more like my speed because I like in-person contact, but at the end of the day, in order for things to keep moving along, you just have to make those calls. And it's not
Sure.
always just like prospecting calls, it's just like execution calls as well, and like the current deals that you have. But the more calls
Mm.
you make, like the more top of mind you are.
Yeah.
So
How many do you think you're making a day nowadays?
it depends on the day. Like we're also very meeting heavy in New
Sure.
York in our
Mhm.
like specific brokerage. So we have to kind of squeeze them in when we can. That's the
Mhm.
other difficult part is like the time management of it. But I would say prospecting calls, I try to make at least like 30 a day. It's also very hard to like get the connections. So that doesn't really matter. Like I could make
Sure.
100, but if I only like connect with two people, that's all that really counts,
Yeah,
you know?
connections meaning they pick up the phone and
Right. And we
there's
have
like
an
an action
actual
item.
conversation, not just
Mhm.
like I'm walking into a meeting, like call me back later.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? That doesn't really count because you didn't
Yeah.
have a conversation.
Yeah, and that
So
distinction's a very key one to make because, they'll not remember if they're just on their way to something else.
exactly, they're just trying to rush you off the phone, so just because they picked up doesn't mean that it was, like, a true connection, so I
Yeah.
don't I don't count that unless I had, like, a real conversation,
Yeah.
like, at least 30 seconds.
Yeah, you gotta measure what matters, right?
Yeah.
And then, as you're breaking into land and development, do you have anything that you wish, any advice or any knowledge that you wish would have been given to you, like on day one about learning the market that you would give to somebody else who's maybe interested in getting into more land development side deals?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, just depending on what market you're in, it's extremely important to understand, like, your city or county or metro, like whatever it is that controls what's going on with land, like
Mhm.
understanding their policies, understanding timelines, like what the approval process is like, if you have to do entitlement work, like
Mhm.
understanding what all of those steps are, how long each of those take, like that's super important, I think, at the beginning
Yeah.
to understand that. That's should be the first thing that you learn, just so that you understand the process first before even trying to like just go for a deal.
Yeah, get a deal together.
Yeah.
I will say, I'm shout out to Bethany Babcock right now. We were just talking beforehand. I'm taking her CRE launch program just
Yeah,
to see the nuts and bolts of how that works.
for
We did
sure.
entitlements today. Oh my gosh.
It's a lot.
It's so much. It's so much going on,
Yeah,
and every city is different.
exactly.
And I'm sure like there's probably differences in New York across boroughs, across, different like regulatory timelines too. And we'll get to City of Yes
Yes.
a little bit later in our conversation.
Yeah.
But wow, there is so much to know. Oh my
So
goodness.
much.
And then before we, dive into the technicalities of land sales, I want to touch on you mentioned time management. Are there any other personal habits or rituals that you've built for yourself that you feel have set you up for success to make all those prospecting calls, to learn your market, and to start building a book of business and going after these deals?
Yeah, things that are like not business related exactly. Yeah, so I think just like fitness and wellness is super important. So I think being like working out every day or, whatever, however many times a week, and then just kind of taking the time to make sure you get enough sleep. I think recovery is super important as well. But like if you get your body moving, if you recover nicely, if you get your hours of sleep in, there should be really no excuse of like any kind of burnout. You know what I mean? Like at the beginning of your career, you're not going to have a ton of work-life balance. That's just the way it is as a younger broker. So you kind of have to just let that go. But you just have to control what you can control and, making sure that you stay healthy. You can't like close any deals if you're like not healthy. You know what I mean? So you have to just like fuel your body, like eat the right foods, make sure that you get like your steps in or whatever kind of workouts like work for you. You have to squeeze that in and make time for that. And again, making sure that you get enough sleep. It's really not productive to try to like work until 2 in the morning and then be back in the office at like 6 or 7. It's just that's not the right lifestyle. You know what I mean? You're going to be so much more productive if you can actually take care of yourself.
Yeah. It's about creating something that's sustainable.
Yeah.
And I will always like surprise myself remembering like, oh, if I actually go to bed early, then I wake up and then there's time to work out and then I actually have more energy. Like it creates this virtuous cycle of setting yourself up for success in different areas. So don't skip your workout, folks.
That's right.
So shifting gears into the nuts and bolts of land sales. So most brokers, by virtue of property that exists, focus on things that are already moneymakers, income producing properties, land and development sites. That's going from 0 to 1. It's something that didn't exist before into something new. What, from your perspective, is unique about being a land and development broker that others in the industry might not appreciate or understand?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we have to know as far as our expertise is completely different than an income producing property, right? So like we don't really do like a pro forma. We don't really speak in like NOI and cap rate because there's nothing there. Like it's not producing any income yet. Whereas like other brokers, that's like all they're talking about all the time. Like when we underwrite a deal or when we put together BOVs, we really don't need any financials. Like most people are like, send me the rent roll and everything else. Like we don't look at any of that stuff because everything that we're putting together is like what's proposed. So we look at like comps for like condo sellouts or rents for office or rentals, and hotels can be tricky as well. But that's the other thing is like you have to know about all the asset classes because in New York, typically you can build, like what you can build of what and how much of that thing in each lot. But most of the time it's not like this lot is only residential. It'll have like some kind of like you could build this much residential or this much office or, commercial. So it could be office or hotel or retail, whatever it is. So you have to have a little bit of familiarity with all of the asset classes.
Yeah, you have to know what the cityscape looks like.
That's right.
Right. So, you mentioned comps. You mentioned other ways that you think about putting what like a prospective proposal would look like. How, in the deals you've worked on so far, do you tell the story of that development deal when you're looking to sell? Because, development inherently is much more risky than just buying something that's already got tenants and it's leased up. How do you think about pitching it when you do have a deal in hand and you're ready to bring it to market?
Yeah, so something we always say at BKREA is like we're selling the dream. Remember that we're selling the dream. We have to sell that to these people because even though like these developers are very creative and they've done projects on their own and they can usually kind of visualize and create their own dream, it's our job to try to get the highest price, right? So we have to kind of figure out the highest and best use for that development site and understand like which components go where, like in the building. Like, is it best to have like retail at the base with the rest like residential? Is it beneficial to add some like office space in there? Is it beneficial to split up some residential and add a hotel component? Like, and we have to just figure out like what makes the most sense as far as the investment, and also just like fitting in the neighborhood character, like what's actually going to make sense for that location. So a lot of times, we have to put in a lot of work. We have to get renderings, we have to get massing studies, which massing studies basically just show you like the outside of the building, like what can be built, the shape of it, where the setbacks are, the height, and etc. So we have to put all that stuff together and then kind of explain to people, because every neighborhood in Manhattan kind of has its own rules and it's totally different, and people don't realize that. So it's not like condos in the Upper East Side are selling at $3,000 a foot, so it must be the same like in Chelsea, and you're like, no, like, and also even within Chelsea, it depends like where you are, because it could be completely different, like what street, what avenue. So it's just a lot of different things that we have to look at versus the rest of the asset classes. So you were right in saying like it's its own thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's all about selling the dream, and selling the dream to the right people, because depending on what you think the highest and best use is going to be, it's a totally different market of potential builders to actualize on that dream you're selling, right? So who are the key players that are investing in these land and development sites in New York today? Is it more like private? Are you seeing more institutional capital come in? I know like that market is so different from an investment landscape than others in the United States. So I'm curious, like, who are the parties you're talking to? Where is the interest coming from?
So it's really site specific, because really it's kind of everyone. So it could be like the smaller kind of mom and pop developers to like some of the biggest developers across like the country or even the world. So it depends how big the development site is, where it's located, like where our pricing guidance is kind of at, and then anywhere. But yeah, we see a lot of foreign capital. We see mainly, I guess I would say, is like people that are local to New York. We don't get a ton of people coming from outside of the city unless it's foreign capital, but typically they'll have like a co-development partner. It's not just them saying like, I'm going to do this project myself. It's more like equities coming from foreign parts of the world. But it's mainly New York locals, just because they're familiar with it, and it's tough. Like developing in New York City is really tough. So like if you don't have the experience in it already, we get a lot of people that want to come in, but then they realize like how much work it is. And then they either just partner up with somebody to try to do their first couple projects, or they're like, maybe not.
Yeah, sounds like LA.
Yeah.
Similar story there, but yeah. It's interesting. So are you seeing, it's all lot dependent, sure, but I guess in terms of deal velocity, what deals are moving through right now? Is it more on the mom and pop side because maybe, it's a little bit smaller of a price, and so they can get the liquidity a little more quickly, get financing a little more quickly, and just have at it? Is it the bigger deals that are going faster? What are you seeing from like a moving transaction perspective?
It's really not about like how big the developer is or how small they are. It's more about like how easy the development can be, if that makes sense. So like very complex deals right now are not getting done, or they're very hard to get done, because in New York you have a lot of like affordability requirements and landmarks, and so when you start plugging in all of those aspects, it makes it very difficult like for the deal to pencil, makes it difficult to build, and etc. So I think that the like cleaner path to like being able to do a very straightforward development, those are the deals that are kind of getting picked up, even if it's at a higher price point, because they're just like, we don't have to deal with this committee and that committee and getting approvals here and there, which is going to delay our project even more. If it's just like the less hairy the deal, the better.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And, there's so many different moving parts and pieces of data to keep track of for every deal you're working on individually, that I'm sure it can be like, okay, just, I need to focus my time one thing at a time, not get distracted.
Exactly.
So I do want to touch on, BKREA bills itself as a technology and real estate company. Seth Samowitz on your guys' ops side is a big AI technology guy, really into finding things to unlock your business from a technology perspective. So I'd love to know, how does your team use tech day to day in providing the most value to your clients?
Yeah, I mean, we have a ton of like programs and websites that we use that help us day to day. I would say, Seth, like you mentioned, has really, been the one spearheading that, and he's done a really great job. And again, we're a startup, so it's all kind of just like trial and error and figuring out what works best and like what's kind of a waste of time. But we're finally at like a really good point where we're, using Property Scout, which is something that is specific to New York City as far as like zoning and like I mentioned, like massing studies and understanding like what you can build where. Like we have all the data like in one place. And it also uses some like components of AI to pull all of the data, and it's all like real time. It's very accurate. And then, we use different CRMs and like databases to keep track of everything. Like you said, there's a lot to keep track of. If you know anything about Bob, he's like a stats guy. So he tracks literally everything. He'll throw out stats sometimes, and I'm like, I didn't even know you were tracking that. So like we have to just make sure that we're automating all of that and making sure that everybody has access to it and that it's not like getting lost. And so we have a ton of internal stuff that we have that kind of helps us in like understanding our markets better, becoming like territory experts, and then helps with the calls, and also something that helps with our marketing reports. So we put out marketing reports every week, and so we have to track everybody that we speak to and like the notes and the feedback that they give us. So something that helps us put together that at the end of the week, so it's not so time consuming.
Sure.
And then of course Crexi. I mean, we couldn't do what we do without Crexi. We, like I said, are data people and stats people, and everything that Crexi gives us is like everything all in one place for different reasons, so we get property owner information, we get great like I mentioned, we have retail at the base of a lot of our developments sometimes too. And so we need to understand like what current lease rates are in the neighborhood. So we find all of that data there.
Thank you for the shout
Of
out. Checks in the
course.
mail. No, I'm kidding. No, I really appreciate that. So, tracking all these different things, you did touch on zoning. What type of zoning issues? Well, first of all, actually, let me backtrack a little bit. Can you give us a little bit of the landscape of what zoning regulations look like in New York from a development perspective? And, from that foundation, can you tell us a little bit about like what are the most common pitfalls or obstacles you see from a zoning or entitlement or whatever perspective that slows down deals?
Yeah. So, I mean, the zoning's very complex. Like we would have to schedule a whole other meeting to kind
We
of
can have
like
another
dive into
podcast,
that.
part two.
Yeah, it's complex, and so that's what I was saying. You have to just be patient and like understanding it because, like I said, every neighborhood's different. So, in the most like basic thing is that New York is an as of right jurisdiction, so you don't have to do any entitlement work. You know what you can build and how much of it you can build for the most part. There's all these other like little rules that come into play, and then you kind of have to get somebody that's more of an expert about those kind of things to understand exactly what you can build. But from a general perspective, you pretty much know. Like it's
Sure.
called FAR, so floor area ratio. So that gives you a number. So say a lot is 10,000 square feet and it has a 10 FAR. How much can you build? 100,000 square feet. So you just multiply it. It's just a multiple. And so same thing, if it's a 12 FAR, build 120,000 square feet, etc. So you can kind of understand like the scale of a project. And that's why you also get massing studies. That's not something that we do as brokers, but you kind of outsource that, and it'll tell you exactly like where the setbacks are. Like the base of the building has to be at 150 feet, and then you need a 10-foot setback or 15-foot setback. What is the height restriction? Is there no height restriction? You'll see a lot in like FIDI and Midtown. There typically isn't a height restriction, especially on the avenues. That's why you see the bigger towers. But in like the more low density neighborhoods, like the villages and stuff, they're much lower FARs, and they do have height restrictions because they don't want to like damage that neighborhood character. You know what I mean? If you just throw up like a 50-story brand new glass
In the
building
village,
in the
you'd be
middle
like,
of the village, people will be like, what the?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where zoning comes into play. And like I said, it's very complex. So there's a ton of other stuff that goes into it. Like I said, there's affordability requirements, there's landmarks. So you can have an individual landmark building that pretty much won't be torn down ever. And then you have historic districts where it's just like the buildings themselves aren't individually landmarked, but they're protected because it has some type of like character, or like some type of the facade work is just protected because it's historic.
Yeah, which I'm sure presents a whole other set of issues for somebody looking to
Exactly.
redevelop some of that.
Yeah.
So I mentioned City of Yes earlier. Can you briefly touch on what that measure was? It's passed, and what does that mean for the future of development in New York City?
Yeah, so City of Yes is the most impactful like zoning change that they've done to the zoning resolution in New York City. And it essentially upzoned a ton of properties. It does have like an affordability component, but a lot of sites now can build more than what they could build before because they're trying to incentivize developers to build more housing. We have, a housing shortage in New York City, and that's why things are so expensive. And so it's all like on the inventory side so that we have no supply. And that's why things are just uber expensive and people are getting priced out. So they want to build more housing so we don't have that issue because there's just such increased demand. So, City of Yes changed a ton of little things. It got rid of something called the sliver law, which was essentially those like really like skinny, more narrow buildings. You couldn't go above a certain height, and it was actually like pretty like small, and so a lot of people weren't building those. So you would see a lot of like smaller lots not being built on because it just kind of didn't make sense. Now they can be much taller and you can build a lot more units, and so it makes more sense. With like landmarks and air rights, you can transfer those. Before you could transfer to any like adjacent property and directly across the street as long as there was 10 feet of contiguous property line. Now you can transfer anywhere on that block where it's facing on the like northern block, the northern portion of like the southern block, directly across like east and west, and even like across like catty corner from others. So you have like 9 blocks that you can transfer to now, whereas before you maybe had like 4 or 5 like properties that could have even taken your air rights. So they're just allowing more flexibility so people can make some money on those air rights that they can't use.
And that just came into effect this last January, correct? 2025?
December 5th, 2024.
Oh, okay. 1 month before.
Yes.
So how are you seeing that shift? What deals are in play right now? Like, are you seeing developers actually start to get started building more residential units? Is it, people are still trying to understand it maybe? What do you see boots on ground, the response to that?
Yeah, so I think, just in general, rentals are not really being built right now, which is tough because that's what the city really needs. But like the tax abatement programs just kind of suck. If you even ask Bob about that, like he will go on a whole rant about it because he's just like, you have to fix that for developers or else they're just not going to build it. And then who does that help, know? The condo market's doing well. That's probably like the highest and best use for most development sites right now. You're going to get the highest price per square foot if you sell it as a condo development. You see a ton of office still being built, honestly, even though, office was distressed for a while, but all the new product is kind of what's still very popular. We're not building any hotels really because we have this crazy special permit that you have to go through, and so that's like very difficult. So unless it's like grandfathered in to the old rules, you're not really seeing any hotels come up. And then retail's strong, but retail's kind of just like built into the other asset classes. You very rarely have like a
standalone retail spot.
Building. Yes, but I think that like the air rights transfers is a huge thing because it's always like about increasing density. How can you increase the density on your site? Because the more units you could build, the more income, and also you're satisfying, building housing for the city.
So on that end, just for our listeners who maybe aren't familiar with air rights in the New York scene, can you explain a little bit of what that means and how that is a piece of the development pie in New York?
Yeah, so it's also a little bit complicated because there's a bunch of different kinds of air rights. And like the technical name in New York is TDRs, or transferable development rights, aka air rights. So air rights is like the invisible air above your building that you're not utilizing. So let's go back to the example when I explained FAR, right? So say you have a site and you own a building and it's like 4 stories, but it's like a 10 FAR. So you have it's probably not 10,000 square feet if you have like a smaller building, but let's say it's like 5,000 square feet, right? And you have a 10 FAR. So you can build 50,000 square feet, but your building's only 10,000 square feet. So you have 40,000 square feet of unused air rights that you're not utilizing, that somebody else could either purchase from you, and you can monetize those because you're not going to use them. They're just like sitting there. Or that can be sold as a development site. And then, you know, you sell that building, and instead of it being like an income producing asset, like a regular multifamily purchase, you're selling it for what it could be. So the 50,000 square feet versus your 10,000 square feet that you have now.
Sure. So it's unlocking a lot of value for current property owners that maybe they didn't have access to before. Exactly. Is what it sounds like. Ooh, exciting times. Yeah. Exciting times. So I guess I'm curious, where was I going with this? We kind of like went into let's get into the the actual like market stats when we were going through all the different asset types. You know, as developers are kind of navigating this new landscape with everything unlocked with the City of Yes, you know, there's still a lot of practical considerations, obstacles they have to figure out. If you could wave a magic wand and remove one barrier to land or development transactions in New York, what would you do?
Oh, man. That's a tough one. It's a little bit of a slippery slope because I do want New York to be affordable, and I do want rents to come down, and I want people to have, like realistic rents that they pay. But what makes my life really difficult? Rent stabilized units and rent controlled units. You could have like a great development site, which in turn could like have much nicer and many more units that could house many more people. But there are these like rent controlled or rent stabilized units that have been that way forever, and these tenants are paying nothing, and they can't get them out. Like there's nothing that they can do to get them out unless you buy them out, and they have to be willing to, take that buyout. And sometimes you can move them to another unit, but they have to be willing to like do that. So a lot of times that just kills deals. And so again, if it's like a little 4-story walk up with like 8 units in it and like 3 are rent stabilized, it just kind of kills the deal, because a lot of times these tenants are taking like $5-10 million buyouts, and that deal won't pencil. Like, so it's just, it kills it. So I think, again, it's not I want to kick people out of their affordable housing, but it's just that, most times you're going to have affordability component in the next development anyways. And so you're just building much more housing. So that makes it really, really tough. If I had to get rid of something, I would get rid of those laws.
Yeah, it sounds like a kind of a chicken and the egg scenario. Whereas if you're able to buy those current tenants out, you could actually, well, I don't know if this is possible at all with rent control in particular, but you could not make it so much more expensive for those residential units in the building you would put in their place.
Right.
But they don't want to leave at the same time.
Exactly.
It's an interesting complex thing to think about. And I'm sure they're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, look, if it were me, I wouldn't want to leave my rent stabilized unit either. You know what I mean? A lot of these guys are paying so below market, and they can only increase them so much year after year. And so it's like, I wouldn't want to leave either. But at the same time, again, being on this side, it makes my life a little bit difficult.
Yeah. I'm in a rent controlled apartment in LA that turns 100 in 2 years.
Oh my gosh.
Which is very fun. I mean, it's got its share of its own issues, but I'm like, I'm not going anywhere else in this city. I'm staying here as long as I can. So I definitely empathize. And then I'm curious, from an investment perspective, what do you think is something that prospective people coming to the table to acquire these development sites, what is something that they get wrong, or a question that they don't ask, that, or a thing they knew that if they knew, like, you're like, okay, like now we're in business, let's move faster, let's get this done. What's something that you would tell them to like look into, maybe either ahead or like in the early days they just bought the deal, that would make their lives easier?
I mean, a lot of things. I just wish they would ask more questions in general. I think this is like a lot of times people just like look at the deal and they just don't ask enough questions, and then they like hear our pricing guidance and they're just like, no, not interested. And you're just like, okay, well, wait a second, because you don't even know how I got there. So like the reason we're asking this is because like we made it make sense to us. It may not make sense to you and like what you're trying to do, but here's like the picture that we're trying to paint. So most times I just wish that people would be more receptive to understanding that we're not just trying to like charge an outrageous price. Like the market is there. They just have to, you know, get creative. And also like I wish people had more of like their own counsel as far as like zoning people that they could go to, like an architect or like a zoning attorney that could advise them in understanding like what you can and can't do.
Sure.
Because we have in-house people that we go to, but obviously people have different opinions. And so sometimes it's just about like asking the right questions, and it's so complex. And that's why we have so many people on the team for like our in-house like policy and zoning guys, because there's just so much. There's so much to consider, and like reading the zoning resolution is like insane.
Yeah,
Like,
you can bring a horse to water, but you can't get them to drink.
exactly.
And then, you know, wrapping up on the New York market, where do you think is the most overlooked opportunity in the development side of things today?
You know, those like sliver sites that I was mentioning and like the sliver law previously, I think that not enough developers are paying attention to that law being eliminated. And I think that they're creating a lot of excuses on like why it won't work, and not thinking about why that may be a project that would make more sense. I get it takes the same amount of time as like doing like or going through the process for like the approvals as like a bigger
It's the same
building.
amount of work.
You still have to do the same amount of work, but also like you're not going to be sitting on a ton of units. So instead of having like 300 units or something, you may have like 8 to 15, and like a much quicker like turnaround time and like getting your investment back. And then you have money to play with again and to go into the next thing. So I think that for like savvy developers, or maybe developers that can't do these like massive developments, I think that that's like super overlooked, because, you know, again, there's problems with sites like that as well, but there's problems with every site. So it's just about kind of getting past those objectives and like getting creative with it.
Yeah. Oh, you heard it first here, folks. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I want to be mindful of our time, because we can, again, zoning is its own podcast, right?
Right. Yes.
But I do have a few rapid fire questions for you.
Okay.
If you're ready.
Yeah.
So I think I can guess the answer to this. But if you were handed $50 million today, and maybe that's not enough in some New York spots, and you had to invest it in real estate immediately, what would your go-to asset type and location be, and why?
Well, land for sure. I mean, I would want to diversify too. I think it'd be important to like maybe get something that is income producing off the bat, just so that, you know, you're kind of flowing a little bit as well. But I would love to hold on to some land in a good location. I don't know about New York City off the bat, just because like, you know, I'm still new there too. And like I was saying, like people coming from outside and trying to figure that out, I think I need to give myself more time before I invest in New York City and like try to develop my own project. But you know, maybe other parts. I think Long Island's really cool. I could do like a project out there. I'm originally from Florida. I think that, you know, no state taxes down there. That would be cool. So just, I think holding on to land is like a great investment.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
probably do that.
Absolutely. Great answer.
Thanks.
What's the craziest way you found a new client?
Craziest way I found a new client. I don't know about crazy, but I think like social media, I've gotten like clients through just like Instagram or like LinkedIn messages.
Oh, through Instagram.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just like cold DMs and
Wow.
yeah. And then being out and about, but not really like at a specific networking event, just like eating or having a drink at a bar or something like that. And then you just like, you know, spark a conversation with somebody there, and then you're like, oh, you're an investor, oh, you like are in real estate, and then like I've met people that way. I've literally just put together a BOV, and I'm sending a listing agreement out to someone that I met at a bar.
That's hilarious.
Like, yeah, a a few weeks ago.
Yeah, there
So,
you go.
there
You
you go.
never know. I feel like especially in New York, where the first question is, so what do you do?
Exactly. That's exactly right.
And then what do you think is the most common misconception about being a broker or being in commercial real estate in general?
I think that people think that we just sometimes get handed these like crazy paychecks and we didn't do a lot of work for it. Like we just kind of threw it on Crexi or online somewhere and just
Only
like
it was
waited.
that easy.
I know, and like waited for people to call us and
Yeah.
like, you know, just like, okay. And then we get paid these like crazy commissions. And so that's a huge misconception, because there's so much work that goes into it. And like later in your career, does it probably get a little bit easier? Sure. I think I've seen that because, you know, you have younger brokers under you or you've built those relationships already. And so you like know who to call. But all of those years prior that you spent grinding and learning and, just really diving into the market, like people don't think about like how much time and effort that took.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why you're getting paid what you get paid, because you're an expert.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard, grueling work.
Exactly.
But people sure like the payoff of it. So
That's right.
you got to be willing to dive on in,
Yeah.
learn something completely new like you did in your brand new market, brand new asset class.
Yeah, exactly.
But, Genessy, thank you so much for coming all the way out here, joining us on the podcast. Really appreciate you taking the time. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch or if they're an investor and they want to send you a DM?
Well, there you go. I live in New York, so you can find me in the Garment District, but you can email me at genessy@bkrea.com. You can text or call me. My number is 352-978-6110. You can call me or text me anytime. And also my social media handles are Genessy CRE for basically all of them.
Easy.
So, yeah,
Easy peasy.
exactly.
And I love the rhyme too. Genessy CRE.
CRE,
I love it.
yes.
Well, thank you so much again. Really appreciate it. This has been a blast. I had a great time.
Thanks so much. This is so much fun. Thank you, Shanti. And thank you to the Crexi team. Seriously, their office here in LA is beautiful and they're all amazing. So,
thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Of course.
And thank you everyone who tuned in today. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't miss the next one. Visit crexi.com/podcast and sign up to get the next episode delivered straight to your inbox. You can also subscribe to the Crexi Podcast on your favorite podcast app or check out our YouTube channel for video recordings of each episode. Take care and be sure to tune in next time.